And I'm glad each one of you are here tonight. And we are going into chapter 41. And it is a pivotal point in the life of Joseph. He goes from being a slave in prison to becoming a second in command in Egypt. And I laugh because that's a huge jump. I mean, can you imagine the change that he had going from being a prisoner to being the one right below Pharaoh? I mean, that must have been a huge impact for him. But I want us to look, starting in verse 1, I want us to notice something very important here. It says, and it came to pass at the end of 2 years, between verse 23 of chapter 40 and verse 40, chapter 41, verse 1 is 2 years. 2 years the butler forgot to tell about Joseph. 2 years longer Joseph stayed in prison. And I know for us reading that, we're like, 2 years, that's not that long. I had worked in the prison system. I don't know, their prison system back then was a lot worse, I'm sure. I couldn't imagine being there 2 more years when you thought you had that opportunity to get out. And you're there 2 more years. So Joseph must have had some strong faith in God. So it says at the end of 2 full years, that Pharaoh dreamed. Behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, which are cows, and fat-fleshed. And they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other, we'll say cows, came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, can't read, and stood by the other cows upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed cows did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. This is a very interesting dream here. I mean, we've got to picture the Nile River here being the great source of water for the people of Egypt. Also cows, being rather important to the nation here. And he sees these 7 well-nourished fat cows come up out of the Nile River onto the bank. And behind these 7 cows, he sees 7 more cows come up. And these are ill cows. In other words, they're not healthy looking. They're very skinny. As it says here, they are, lean flesh. In other words, they're just skin and bones. And they stood up on the bank of the river. And what we see here is the smaller cows, the lean cows, the ill-flourished cows, eat the fat cows. And what we don't see here is the lean cows getting fatter when they eat the fat cows. You would think if you eat something that much bigger, it's going to affect you in some way, but it doesn't. So we have the 7 healthy cows being eaten by the 7 unhealthy cows. And he was real concerned about this, I'm sure. Verse 5 says, and he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up on one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. This phrase, blasted with the east wind, there was this wind that would come out of the east that would devastate crops. It was a scorching heat. It was a wind that was, from what I read, a dangerous wind as far as for the crops. So he's kind of giving us the picture here that not only were these ears that came up the second time not healthy, they were pretty much destroyed, because of the east wind that came through. And it says, and the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So we have 7 ears of corn that are full, healthy pieces of corn. We have 7 pieces of corn that are kind of done. You wouldn't need them. And they devour the 7 healthy ones. Now, we are looking at another thing important to the Egyptian people was the grain. They relied on the grain for their nourishment, for their food, for all their supplies. So the cows, which were very important to the Egyptian people, and then you had the grain, which is important to the Egyptian people. He's seeing both things here of the worst one defeating the healthy ones. So of course, this really discouraged him. Look at verse 8. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, and there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. So he's like, we've got to find out what these dreams mean. So he called all the magicians, which are supposed to be able to do what? Interpret dreams. All the wise men who obviously were intelligent to come and interpret the dreams. Every single one of these men that came, we don't know how many, we're not told, but none of them could interpret the dream. But all of a sudden the butler remembers who? Joseph. 2 years later. Come on, butler, get it together. I mean, you had 2 years to remember Joseph. I don't know if this brought him to mind the dreams or what. We see in verse 9, then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, I do remember my fault this day. Now, some commentaries say that he was talking about what he did to Pharaoh, which caused him to end up in prison, which caused him to meet Joseph, which caused him to be interpreted of the dreams by Joseph. Some people say it means the fault that he didn't tell about Joseph and kind of messed that thing up. So whether it was the fault of what he did wrong to end up there, or the fact that he never told about Joseph, he said, I remember it. But I also want you to realize that it looks like, according to verse 10, that it might be the first one, that you never bring up to a king what you did against him to get put in prison once he's released you. So he says, I remember my fault. Then I want you to see in verse 10, it says, Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put them in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. So he is saying, this is what I remember. I remember that you were mad and you put us in the prison. He said, and we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he, meaning the baker, we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, a Hebrew servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dreams did he interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored into mine office, and him he hanged. So he now remembers. He says, look, this man Joseph told us exactly what was going to happen. You restored me back, as Joseph said. The other one was hung, as Joseph said. So now Pharaoh's thinking, what? Let's get Joseph. I mean, he can interpret dreams. Let's check it out. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself, and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. You never hear much of his family or the Jewish people shaving a lot. You know, they a lot of times you see them, they have facial hair, even in movies. But when you see pictures of Egyptians, a lot of times they're either clean shaven or they have like a little goatee down here, which was from what I read, was kind of a sign of power or authority. So he cleaned himself up to, in a way, represent himself. Not only that he was no longer in that position of being in prison and cleaned himself up to look better, but kind of to match the Egyptian people as he was appearing before Pharaoh. He changed his garments into something that looked better than what he was in before, and he came unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there's none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. I mean, this is the prime moment for Joseph to be like, yep, I can do it. I got it. To kind of, rise himself up, as being prideful. Yes, I can do it. But what was his response? And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. In other words, I didn't do it. I can't do it. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Not God will give Pharaoh a positive response. He's not promising that. He's promising that God will give Pharaoh an interpretation to his dream, which would then put him at what? At peace, because he now knows what's going on. So it's not like he's saying it's going to be a good dream, but you're going to know the answer through God. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came out of the river 7 cows, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed. You notice that Pharaoh added a word there. He added the word poor there. I don't know if that was just his interpretation of what he saw, but he did add a word there from the original dream he had. Such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean of the ill-favored cows did eat up the first 7 fat cows. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored as at the beginning. In other words, what I stated in the beginning, they didn't get fatter. They ate the cows, and you could not even tell they had eaten the cows. So I awoke, and I saw my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up, and one stalk full and good. Behold, 7 ears with withered, thin, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. So it appears he's given Joseph a more detailed view of what he saw. His dream was something, but he's saying, this is what I saw when I dreamed it, which all of us have that. How many of us can recall vivid things of our dreams sometimes? You know exactly what happened in that dream. And I think that's all he's doing here by adding these words. It says, and the thin ears devour the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it unto me. So what does the dream mean? And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. In other words, both dreams mean the same exact thing. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. So God has given Pharaoh a prophecy that this is what's about to happen in Egypt and all over the whole world, really. He says the 7 good cows are 7 years. And the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. The 7 thin and ill-favored cows that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. So he's telling them both predict one thing. You're going to have 7 years of plenty, and you're going to have 7 years of famine. So that's what the dream is all about. It says, this is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Again, he's saying, who's telling the results of this dream? God. What God is show with you, he is about to do. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall rise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine followed, for it shall be very grievous. And for that dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. The first dream was that God is establishing it. He is showing Pharaoh this is what's going to happen. God reiterated it to say it's going to happen soon. So we got the 7 years to get ready for the 7 years of famine. And just as the fat cows were devoured by the skinny cows, and the skinny cows showed no signs of devouring a huge cow, he said you will see no signs of the plenty when the famine comes. In other words, there won't be no remembrance of it as there was with the other ones. So since this is the dream, what should the response be? Well, I like Joseph, what he says here to him. He says in verse 32, and for that dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because a thing is established by God, and God will surely bring it to pass. Now therefore, let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be in store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. He says, this is what you need to do now. Okay, you know what the dream is about. You know what's coming. You need to find somebody who is wise, somebody who is creative and knows how to handle these situations. You need to place him in power. Then when you place him in power, he needs to place other ones under him in power to take care of the plenty that's there. He says you need to take this plenty for these 7 years, and you need to take a fifth of all the land. And don't eat this. What are we going to do with this? We're going to store it. Now, if you look at the old Egyptian places, they had these, my mind went blank, silos where they would store stuff. And that's kind of what the idea is here, that I want to store this in silos in each city, but it'd be under the control of who? Pharaoh. He said put it under Pharaoh, under his hand, so that when the famine comes, we don't have to worry about food in Egypt. So what Joseph did was he took the negative part of the dream and he said, let's change that to a positive. How many times in life should we take the negative and change it to a positive? It's so easy to look at the negative side and be like, well, you know what we call negative Nancy? Everything's always negative. But take that negative side and try to turn it into a positive. And that's what Joseph is saying we need to do. We need to take what God is giving us now. Shouldn't we think about that in our lives right now? Take what God has given us now and don't worry about the future, but prepare for the future. I think about that sometimes, every time Social Security gets a little lower, and a little lower, and a little lower. When I get 65, it'd be 75 to get Social Security, and there won't be nothing there. So we need to be smart, and we need to prepare for the future, but not worry about the future. I believe there's a difference. It's not like you're not trusting God, but if I put no money back for retirement now, then when I get 65 and 70, what am I going to do then? Right? So he's like, we got to put food back now, so when those 7 years of famine come, we're all set. Any thoughts before we look at the next few verses here? Next half a page. All right, it says, and the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is? Listen to what he says. A man in whom the Spirit of God is. It's the first time that you mention in the Old Testament, the Spirit of God. Pharaoh noticed something of the fact that he needed who? He needed God. This wasn't a man issue. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God has showed thee all this, there's none so discreet and wise as thou art. God will always show himself if you allow him to. Joseph did. Joseph didn't say, man, I can interpret dreams. I'm good at this. He said, God can do it. And God used him now in a greater way. Look what happens to Joseph. This is amazing. It says, thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Y'all see that? That's second in command in Egypt. This is Joseph, the young boy who was thrown into a pit, was sold into slavery, put in prison by being falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, now is becoming a second in command in Egypt. And not only that, Pharaoh said, the only place that I have more power than you is where? In the throne room, on the throne. In other words, you got all power. But that's not it. He said, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I've set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand. A ring back then was a sign of authority because they had that signet on it, that they could sign stuff and make rules and laws. So he took his ring off his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. Back then, a gold chain was a huge thing to receive. I mean, it wasn't like nowadays, people got gold chains everywhere. It may not be real gold, but it's not something that's real big. But in Egyptian days, you notice when you see pictures of Egyptians back in the day, they had like the nice jewelry, and they were always like well adorned. So it was like a sign of wealth and power. It says in verse 43, and he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, so the chariot right behind Pharaoh. And they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh. Who else said I am? God. You see Pharaoh's mindset? Still, Pharaohs have always had that mindset of what? I'm a god. I mean, I rule. And that's kind of what I thought of when I heard, I am Pharaoh. I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. In other words, you're the man. You're the one in charge. Nothing's going to happen except for you allow it. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath Paneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, and Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. His name means God speaks and he lives. Egyptian name for God speaks and he lives. What a great name for Joseph, right? God speaks and he lives. I believe Joseph went out all over the land because of the fact that he wanted to not only see what was there, but to get out. I mean, think about it. He's been in prison for a while. Just get out and explore. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth by handfuls. In other words, God wasn't holding back because he's following who? Following God. So God wouldn't hold him back. I mean, it wasn't just a normal crop. He said it was coming by handfuls. I mean, they could just keep loading up. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. He just couldn't even count it anymore. There was so much food that Joseph's like, just stop counting. Just stop worrying about it. Just put it up. I mean, just stack it up. It says, and unto Joseph was born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn, what? Manasseh. For God said, he made me forget all my toil in all my father's house. The name of the second called he Ephraim, for God had caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. If Joseph would have remembered his toils and where he came from and the life he had, he'd have just gotten discouragement, right? Like a state of depression. But he continued to be strong. And that's what Manasseh's name means, that he made me forget all my toils that I was going through, my father's house, and just to be where I'm at. And Ephraim means that God made him to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7th, now what do we know about Manasseh and Ephraim? They become 1 or 2 of the 12 tribes of Egypt. Or not of Egypt, of Israel. Egypt, yeah. And it's interesting why, and I'm going to do some more study on this, but I wonder if Joseph ever left Egypt. Because why is Joseph not one of the 12 tribes? Maybe he never left Egypt. Maybe because I think I read later on that they had to carry his body back once he passed. So maybe that's why Manasseh and Ephraim became part of the 12 tribes. But being in the foreign country here with these false gods, Ephraim and Manasseh also had a lot of problems with adultery during their time. So maybe it just shows that it did affect them being there, but they still were part of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now let's finish this up. In the 7 years of plenteous, and was in the land of Egypt, were ended, and the 7 years of dearth or famine began to come, according as Joseph had said, and the dearth was in all lands. In all lands. That means even where who lives? Joseph's family. That's going to come into play next week. Even where Joseph's family lives. But in all land of Egypt, there was what? There was bread. Why? They prepared ahead of time. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. I believe this means the Egyptians all around. And the Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph, what he said to you, do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. Now look what Joseph does. And Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. So he not only fed them, but he also made money for the land of Egypt at the same time. And all the countries came into Egypt to Joseph to buy corn, because that famine was so sore in all the lands. So what's going to happen, and we all know, is God is going to use Joseph to bless his family. The same family who did what? Sold him into slavery. So God's a forgiving God, but Joseph had to go through all of that to get to where he's at now. So what that tells me is, don't give up. Yeah, it looks discouraging sometimes. It looks like things are never going to change. But keep faith. And eventually God may do something extraordinary like he did in the life of Joseph. Any thoughts?